What's up, guys? My name is Michelle and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, I am a reseller online and I sell used clothes and things. I almost messed up saying the word used, but anyway. Today I want to talk about vintage graphic tees, and let me just start off by saying all of the information that I'm going to share I found online myself. I do not call myself an expert. I only sell this stuff online, and this is information that I've gathered through primarily 2 websites and then my own experience purchasing shirts for myself and by selling them. So the first 2 sites that I'm going to direct you to are defunkt.com, DEFUNKD, and Vintage Fashion Guild. Both of those sites are really helpful, and they're great resources for anyone who's interested in vintage or vintage graphic tees especially. And those are the best places that I could even point you to just getting started or like reading more information about not just graphic tees but just vintage in general. So yeah, those 2 sites, I'll put them in the description box down below and hopefully they're helpful to you. But if you still want to watch this video after saying all that, I've got a couple notes and I'm gonna just blurt them at you. So hopefully this information is a good like 101 info session, but I don't actually think it gets much more complicated than this outside of, let's just start. There are a few different factors that help you to identify whether or not if something is vintage, and so don't just go off of one thing just because you see that one, or if it doesn't have something, like if it's just single stitch, don't just say, oh, well, this shirt is single stitch, so it must be a vintage shirt. That's not necessarily true. Or this isn't 100% cotton, so I don't know, it must be vintage or it must be modern. Like, there's a few different things you want to look at, and so yeah. Number 1, you want to look at the tag. And the reason you want to look at the tag is because that's going to be that's going to be like the first thing to tell you whether or not it's modern or not. For the most part, this will, if it's printed directly onto the shirt, that's going to completely eliminate it as it being vintage. Doesn't mean that you don't buy it still. It might still be a cool shirt and you might still be able to get some value out of it if the graphic is really great, especially if it's like a band tee or something like that. But the fact that it's just printed on like this, that's a dead giveaway. But okay, let's say it's not directly printed onto the shirt and it looks something like, let's see, this one. This is a Screen Stars t-shirt. Let me see, I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's a Screen Stars tag, and I know that this was made, or it was estimated to have been made in 1983. Why? Because they changed the tag with the letter A on this tag. They changed that tag in 83. You'll see this kind of a tag and you'll say, okay, yeah, it looks old. I'm pretty sure that it's old. And then if you look a little bit more closely, you'll see the material. But before I even get there, obviously there are going to be modern shirts. So let me pull up another one that have tags. And this one is actually, I'm pretty sure this is like a early 90s shirt. And you can see this is a Digimon t-shirt. This has more of like a, I call these like satin tags because they're like shiny and soft. This only started happening in like the 90s and early 2000s, these like satin tags. So I hope you can see that. And this is a brand called Lofties. This t-shirt in particular is a newer shirt, but this is also a good indicator to say, yeah, this might be new, this might not be new. It's just one factor. Okay, going back to the fabric on this t-shirt. So just by looking at it, I don't know, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't think it's vintage. It's just a green shirt and it's got like a black graphic on it. And so anyway, looking at the tag, it says it right here that it's 50% cotton and 50% polyester, made in the USA. And primarily you'll see most vintage shirts are made in the USA. Before things started getting made overseas in Guatemala, Honduras, China, wherever, you'll see that most of the shirts that we're going to be looking at are made in the USA. So, that we're going to be looking at. I really mean most of the vintage shirts that hopefully we'll be looking at, you know. I'm talking about the future. I'm talking about us. Anyway, moving on. This says 50/50 and made in USA, and that is a great indicator. So that right there tells me that this is an older shirt. And so, again, not one factor is going to be telling you whether or not that it's vintage, but it's the fact that it's got this tag. The tag is telling me all of this information, that it's a 50/50 blend, which, let me also just say, whenever you are creating a listing, if you're selling this item, you're going to want to say 50/50 blend, cotton polyester, because a lot of collectors who are looking for vintage t-shirts are going to be searching out that term 50/50 blend. There's also another blend, which is like a tri blend, which would be cotton, polyester, and rayon, and that is another blend, but it's more rare to find. For the most part, you will find 50/50 blends, or you may just find stuff that even has just 100% cotton. This is an older Champion label, and that's just 100% cotton. So that's why I say there's no one factor that's going to point to whether or not that it's vintage. It's a culmination of things, and you have to look at all of these things side by side with each other and sort of just the combination of information. Wow, that was a tongue twister. You have to look at everything as a whole and say whether or not something is vintage. Okay, I'm saying the word vintage so many times, like this is going to be a drinking game. Like, take a shot every time I say vintage. Okay, I think that's that on the T and on the tag. The other factor that you're going to be looking at is condition. So a lot of the t-shirts that sell for, $200, $300 more, those are going to be mostly like band t-shirts or really sought after, like, I want to say like character shirts or like cartoon kind of shirts, things like that, like comic book characters, or like, I don't know, maybe a Disney shirt, or like limited run prints for a band t-shirt. There are a lot of reproductions made on those more highly sought after shirts, and so you're going to want to check, obviously, condition. And condition is another dead giveaway if something is a reproduction or not. If you are finding an absolutely pristine, like, Led Zeppelin shirt, or an absolutely pristine Queen shirt, or whatever, you're going to have to look into it a little bit more, just kind of do your due diligence. When you're looking at condition, you don't want it to be totally pristine. I mean, you want it to be in good condition, hopefully, but let me also say on the other side of it, if it has so many holes and it's super ripped up and it's torn, that's not always a bad thing, because some collectors want their shirts to be a little bit lived in. So I have an example that I'll put, I don't know, over here somewhere, of a Queen shirt that I found that had a couple of holes and things, but I sold it for $45, and because it was vintage, I was able to sell it for that price point, a little bit more than you would be able to sell any other item, or any other just basic t-shirt, I should say. So even though it had holes, it didn't, it still attracted a buyer, and somebody still wanted to purchase it. That being said, here's another t-shirt that's, I think I already showed you here, but this is a shirt with like a cracked graphic. Now, this is a shirt that I bought for myself, and so this is, not anything amazingly special, but seeing that cracking on the graphic, you're saying, okay, yeah, that's a screen print. So it was a silk screen print directly onto the shirt, and you could see that it's cracking, and that you could see sort of like the difference of texture between the graphic itself and the t-shirt. Whereas a more modern shirt, you'll see it's not printed onto the shirt, it's just like ink directly into the fabric. I don't know if that description is very helpful, but what I'm trying to say is that the way that they print the shirts now is different. This is obviously commercially produced, and so there were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of this same kind of shirt made, and so because of that, they are not going to do a silk screen print onto the shirt, this is much more expensive to do it in this technique as opposed to just printing it with the ink onto the shirt like this. With condition, you'll see that if it's something like this, but the graphic is maybe cracking or something, if it's still a really cool style, like if it's a band t-shirt or something like that, you might still be able to ask close to whatever the regular comps are on it. If a shirt is really sought after, you'll be able to sell it no matter what. If a shirt is just kind of like holy and not really sought after, it's just a kind of graphic that not many people are interested in, then you're probably not going to be able to get top dollar for that item. That's pretty much true of all resale, but with graphic tees in particular, and especially vintage graphic tees, you can sell them even if it isn't in perfect, pristine condition. And a lot of the time, that patina or having a little bit of fading in the right places is actually a positive. So it just depends, and I'll leave it there. Age isn't just something that you can tell by the tag. So you can usually tell by this tag. So I'm looking at this tag and I'm like, yeah, that's probably 80s. Yeah, this is definitely 90s. Oh, that's a modern shirt. And then this one's 80 something. Yeah, just looking at those things, you can tell how old they are. But also, a lot of shirts will actually say right there on the graphic, this one doesn't, but a lot of the time it'll have the date tiny in the corner, and I'll show a picture somewhere up here. Actually, I do have an example of this. So this is a Cheers shirt or a sweatshirt, and this one is from 1994. I'm now officially going to date myself on the internet. This is the year of my birth. But anyway, this was made in 1994. This kind of a date, you'll see that on t-shirts as well with reproductions, because a lot of people will make something that looks like it's old, but it's not actually old. They might include a date on it, so you're gonna wanna look into it a little bit more to see if it's actually from that date or that time period. This was actually one of the first tips that I learned when I started looking into like vintage graphic tees and things, was about stitching. So this red shirt has a single stitch right here on the shoulder, and as well as on the sleeve. If I get really close, I don't know, I think you can see that, but it's just one stitch down the center, or down the seam, I should say, and you can see it when you flip it over. It's just one stitch going all the way down. It's the same on this green one. I think you can see it maybe a little bit more clearly here, that it's just one stitch versus, let me see, two, which you'll see on all of the t-shirts I'm sure you have at home. This is two stitches going all the way down. Now this one has the single stitch on the bottom, but it could just be because this is a crop top and somebody probably cut this shirt and then cropped it themselves and then sewed it across the bottom. So this one I wouldn't actually call single stitch, even though there is a single stitch along the bottom seam. You're looking at the sleeve, the shoulder, and the bottom to say that it's single stitch. That's another good indicator, though I will say that's one of the first things that modern brands will take from their past. And you'll see a lot of modern brands actually making single stitch t-shirts just to have that look. It's one of those things that it doesn't mean that it's vintage, but it is a good indicator if you see it with a tag that says that it's a 50-50 blend. The tag is a little bit crinkled, maybe the shirt looks a little old. All of those things will, you know, sort of just add to the fact that it could be vintage. When it comes to sizing, you'll see with vintage, everything gets smaller the further back in history you go. So a t-shirt in the 90s that's a size medium is going to be bigger than a shirt from the 80s or the 70s or the 60s and so on that is also a size medium. They get increasingly larger over time. And so that sort of vanity sizing tends to happen. And so you always, let me also just say that you should always include measurements when it comes to vintage, because it's really hard to get a gauge on the size just by saying medium or small or whatever. This shirt, for example, is an extra large, and you'll see that it's probably more like a modern large. Like this is definitely not an extra large. And that's 100%. Like when I put this shirt on, it's definitely more like a men's large, or even a medium, I would say, because I could probably give this to my boyfriend and he would fit in it. And so size makes a difference, but that's when you're starting to get more in, that's a little bit more nuanced. Like when you're just starting to look for these items, the size isn't going to make a difference. If you find a really cool graphic, I'll pick it up at any size. Now, the other thing that I mentioned was the graphic. So a graphic, this one is just on the front, and this Digimon one is, oh, it's upside down. It's also just on the front here. But when you have a graphic that is front and back, this is both, that's a little bit more desirable, usually, and especially when it comes to like a band t-shirt or something like, I don't know, like a movie shirt or something like that. Those tend, as far as I can see, like looking at comps and solds, those can go for a little bit more, or you can ask for a little bit more. As well as the all over print graphic tees, those will also sell for a little bit more, like the edge to edge graphic. Now, you will see that like some edge to edge graphics, especially like older styles, if they're more offensive or if they're just like, I don't know, there's like a weird color palette thing going on, then it may not go for quite as much, but it's all depending on what the content of that graphic tee is. So if it's a really cool print and it's something that's really desirable, it's going to sell. That's the bottom line. So when it comes to pricing an item, you're going to want to look at all of the factors that we just talked about, or I just talked about, and all of those things are going to be able to help you to decide how you actually want to price it. An app that I use is called Completely, and that's something you have to pay for, but it's available. I'm not sure if it's on Android, but it's definitely on iOS, and it just helps you to search eBay sold. So really all it is searching eBay solds, and that'll help you to price it, obviously, just by looking at like recently sold listings that are comparable to your own, hopefully. Anyway, I think that pretty much sums up info in terms of identifying vintage graphic tees and helping you to appraise them. If you have any other questions, I would be happy to help answer them, and I will put all the links to, well, the two sites that I named down in the description box below. Let me know if you like selling graphic tees or if you're going to try selling them in the future, because hopefully this was helpful and you can pick them up. There is definitely money to be made in graphic tees, and I don't know, I think they're cool, and they're just a part of history that I think when it comes down to it with vintage, you really are just finding pieces of history and you're passing them along, and I think that's really cool. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and yeah, let me know down in the comments if you're gonna start selling t-shirts or if you already do. Okay, I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.